in this video covering the notes given in class on the 22nd of March, Year 10 notes on Friday. Now in this particular video we'll go through the second set. First we had unit conversion, but here we've got trigonometry. That's our main thing that we'll be covering in this video. So let's look at our first triangle. Suppose we're given a triangle. And suppose we do not have these letters here, the O and the H, on the triangle. You're just given the 100 meters, 70 degrees and the X. Alright, and we're also not given this answer here. So it might be good if I just try to make everything a bit larger here, just for the sake of we can just see the bits that we need. We'll just get rid of that bit there at the bottom. So that's what you're given, except you're not even given the O and the H here. The first step in order to solve this, you're trying to find out what X is, the missing side there. First step is to label the sides here. How do we know how to label this as O and H? Start with H. Always start with H. H is the longest side. Whatever the side is the longest, you will label H. So this one here, 100 meters, you label that as H. You can measure it if you need to, compare and see which one is the longest. Now we've also got, next we've got to label O, and you look at the angle that's given, whatever angle is given, and you go as far away as possible from that angle to the other side, which is opposite. And if it's got an X or a letter or a number, it doesn't matter what it is, whether letter or number, you put an O there because it's opposite than 70 degrees. Now the final side over here is in fact A, capital A for adjacent, but we leave it blank because it's blank. If there's no letter and no number on this side over here, we do not label it as anything. It would be A if we had to label it, but we're not labeling it. A means adjacent next to the angle, and of course this one's adjacent next to the angle as well, but that one has already been labelled as H, so it cannot be A. This one over here would be A, but as I said, because it's blank, we leave it blank. Alright, next step that we need is to go down here and have a look at our SOHCAHTOA formula thing here. Let's go down. We've got SOHCAHTOA, and notice we've got S. S stands for sine, OH. Alright, so S means sine when we have OH. Ka. C. C stands for cos on your calculator. Use cos when we have AH. And then finally TOA. T stands for tan on your calculator, which we use when we have O and A labelled on our triangle. Let's have a look. So remember what we had labelled on our triangle. We had O and H. So we use that SOHCAHTOA to find out whether to use sine, cos or tan. And notice that S stands for sine, which we use when we have O and H labelled on our triangle. So we're going to use sine. Let's go back to our triangle over here. We've decided that we're going to use sine. We've decided how to use sine by looking at the way we labelled the O and the H there. We did not have an A. Alright, just had the O and the H, and when we have an O and H, that's SO, we use sine. Now, next step is to decide whether to use divide or not. Now you use divide when you're trying to find the long side. In other words, if there is a letter on the long side, an X, a Y, a Z, an A, B or C on the long side, you use divide. In our case here, we do not use divide because there's no letter on our long side. So it's simply 100 sine 70. Now, how do you know where to put the 100 and the 70? Well, we start with our side that is given, 100. We decided that we were going to use sine, okay, earlier on because we had the O and the H, right, when we labelled it. So we've got sine, and then we've also got 70 degrees. You always end with your angle at the end. So that's our answer, 100 sine 70. Press it on the press equals on the calculator and you would end up your value for x. Next bit over here. We are trying to find x again, and we're given this information. We're not given the answer in red, and we're not given these blue bits here either. Those are things that you need to put in yourself. Okay, notice that once again we start with the longest side. If it's a letter or a number, either way, letter or number, in this case it's a letter, x. If it's a letter or number and it's a long side, we call it H, and it's better to label the H first to avoid confusion. H first. Second one to label is it's better to label the O. It's the next one after that, usually better O. Now to do that we look at the angle that's given, 47 degrees, and we notice that O is directly opposite, as far away as possible from that angle, 47 degrees. So this side over here, 50 meters, is in fact the opposite of, it's opposite the 47 degrees. So we label that one as O for opposite. And once again, similar to the very first triangle that we had, we have our final side over here, and that one's blank. We just leave it blank. That would have been A for adjacent next to the 47 degrees, but because it's blank, we leave it blank. We then need to do our second step, and that's to find out whether to use sine, cos or tan based upon those letters that we had there. And notice again we had O and H, and before O and H we have the letter S. Okay, so there's a sa, ka, toa. Find the O and H where they're right next to each other, and then before that O and H we have a letter called letter S. S stands for sine. We're going to use sine. Okay, so we've decided to use sine. And the final step is to figure out whether to use divide or not. Now we use divide when we're trying to find the long side. So we have a letter here on our long side, and that means we're trying to find it. So when there's a letter on the long side, you're trying to find it, we use divide. So we've got divide there. 50 divided by sine 47. Now once again, which way around do we do this? We're given 50, we're given 47. Well, which one's first? It's always the side first. Side 50 divided by sine followed by the angle in every case. Okay, let's move to our next one here. Now, our next one is this triangle here, down the bottom here. And let's just assume that we are not given the A and the H. You've got to figure that out and work that out. Okay, so I put that there for the sake of the video, already put in. But we assume that we don't have it there. Now the first thing to put in is to find out, well, which is the longest side, and whether it's got a number on it or a letter. You must label it whether it's got a number or a letter, doesn't matter which one. Okay, so if this one has a number, we've got to label that long side as H. It's the longest side, so we label it H. Next step is usually the opposite side. Notice that opposite the 85 would be way over here, this blank side. Okay, so it's as far away as possible from the 85 is this side over here, the blank side, which is O. Now we don't put an O there though. because it's blank. If it's blank, you leave it blank. There's no letter, no number, you leave it blank. That would be ovo. Okay, so the only other letter left is actually A. Alright, you could just put it in there because it's the last letter left. Alright, so we know that that one would be O, but we don't use it, but we know that that one's O. So we can't put O anywhere else, because it would go there. That's where it should go, but it's blank. We just don't write it down, that's all. Now, next to the angle that's given, 85 degrees, we have the adjacent side, and if it's a letter or a number here on the side, on the outside, a letter or a number, then we need to label it. It gets labelled as A for adjacent, meaning next to the 85 degrees. Now people get confused because 120 is also next to 85. Yes it is, but we've also labelled it as H already, so that one is not our adjacent. This other one that we haven't labelled yet is our A for adjacent, next to, not the longest side, and it's next to. Alright, so the letters we have are A and H. What we need to decide next is whether to use sine, cos or tan. So let's scroll down here. We have our formula so ka toa. Memnotic there, so ka toa. So we have A and H, which come after the letter C, which stands for cos. Alright, so because we're finding we've labelled A and H, right? On our triangle we had A and H, and C comes before the A and H, so we know we're going to use C, which is cos. We're going to use cos. Alright, so that's where we get the cos from. Alright, just remember we have that. That's actually a blank technically to begin with. Alright, next step is to figure out whether to use divide or not. Now, we only use divide if we're trying to find the long side. Are we trying to find the long side? The answer is no, we're not trying to find the long side. The long side is actually given to us here, 120 meters. If it was an X here on the long side, if it was an X or another letter A, B, C or Y or Z or anything, then if it was a letter on there, not the H, don't worry about that, because we put that there, remember. Alright, if it was originally a letter there, another letter originally there, before we put the H there, if it was originally a letter, then we would use divide. Now originally there was no letter there, it's just 120, given it, don't use divide. Okay, so if it's a number there on the long side, you don't use divide. 120 cos 85. Now you just start with that number there, 120 followed by cos, because we decided we were going to use cos in the previous step, and followed by the angle that's given, 85. As simple as that, just press equals and you get your answer. Next step. Now, next question here, we've got this one here. Now, let's pretend we don't have the answer there. We don't have the A and the H there either. How are we going to label this? Well, look at the long side to begin with, and if it's a letter or a number, we're going to put an H there. So let's put an H there. Next step is to find the opposite. Opposite the 30 degrees, the angle given there, we have all the way over to this side here. On the opposite we have the opposite, this one here. Now do we label it though? The answer is no, you don't put a label in there, don't put an O in there, because it's blank, you must leave it blank. It's not going to help you decide what to use if you have 3 letters in there. You need to just have 2 letters. In this case we're not having an O. That is O there, yes, but we don't put it in there. The final letter we need to deal with is the A, which is next to the 30 degrees, okay? Alright, now H, that's next to, but that's the long side. It's not the long side, and it's next to 80 meters is next to, or the side here is next to the 30, the angle. Alright, it's right next to the angle. So that one is labelled as A for adjacent next to. We have A and H, and when we have A and H, we can use that to decide whether to use sine, cos or tan. So we have A and H here, and before the A and H we have C, which stands for cos, so we're going to use cos. And then the final step, third and final step, is to decide whether to use divide or not. So, you see in the answer we use divide, haven't we? Right? But how do you know? If you don't know the answer, how do you know? So how we decide this is we look at the longest side. If we're trying to find the longest side, if there's a letter, in other words, on the longest side, that means you're trying to find it, then and you know, don't worry about that one labelled there, but the other thing, which is a letter, the other one is a letter. Alright, over here, remember we had H here, and ignoring that H at the moment because we don't need it anymore, we used that to decide whether to use sine, cos or tan. We don't need it anymore, just ignoring that letter there. If we're given a number, we don't use divide, but if we're given a letter on our longest side, apart from the H, letter, yes, we're given a letter here, an X. That means we use divide. Alright, so 80 divided by cos 30. Start with the side that's given, 80, divided by cos, and then the angle finally. Alright, next bit is these questions here. Okay, so pretend that you don't see this 105, 10, 55, which is actually our answer, just having a bit of a preview of the answer there, and pretend that you don't see the O and the A because we're going to label that there. That's where you wouldn't be given the A and the O in the test. Alright, so first of all, let's label the H, the hypotenuse. Right, so the hypotenuse is in fact the longest side. And our longest side, if you measure, it's actually this side over here. Find that this top side here, in this case it's on the top, it could be anywhere, but it's on the top in this case, and that is our H, our longest side. But we don't label it. It's an H, yes, but we don't put it there because when it's blank, leave it blank. Alright, next step is the O. We've done our H, we need to, or we've found out that's the H there, but we've left it, but we've dealt with H. Next letter is our O. O is opposite the 55 degrees, opposite the angle given. This side here is opposite the angle given, it is O. Alright, now if it's either a number or a letter already given to you, or letter or a number, it's not blank, but it's got a letter or a number there, then you need to label it. Alright, so we put an O there. And our final side over here, adjacent next to the 55 degrees. Alright, so you put an A there. Now, that one over there was H. We didn't put it in, but that would be H, right? Okay, so if that's going to be H, even though you don't put it in there, it's still H, just an invisible H. The other one that's next to, shorter side that's next to the 55 is going to be adjacent A. Alright, so we have O and A. Alright, so just going over here, we've got O and A down over here. Alright, so O and A, and before the O and A we have T. Alright, so we're going to use tan. O and A, if you've labelled O and A, you use T, tan. Alright, so let's go back to that there. We're going to use tan. We've got that from the O and the A. Right, now next step is to figure out whether to use divide or not. Now, in this particular case, I actually have to take you back to this SOHCAHTOA. Notice that the H, and when we're trying to find H, we use divide. When we're trying to find H here for ka, we use divide, right? When TOA doesn't have an H in it. It's a little bit different. Okay, so it's the last letter in TOA. last letter in TOA is A. If we're trying to find the A, it's always the last letter. See, last letter is H, last letter is H, but in TOA, the last letter is A. If we're trying to find the last letter, you could remember this mnemonic. You think to yourself, dead end divide, dead end divide. So at the end of SO we have H. If we're trying to find our H, we use divide. At the end of Ka we have an H. If we're trying to find our H, we use divide. At the end of TOA we have an A. We're trying to find A, we use divide. Alright, so let's just go back again. Alright, so over here we've got, we're given our A. We're not trying to find our A. Alright, 105 meters, so we don't use divide. Okay, and once again side followed by tan followed by the angle that's given. Alright, next bit over here. Got our final one just here. Once again, first of all, we just assume we don't have the answer, we don't have the letters, extra blue letters in here. So you would first label the H. Now the H is blank. This is our longest side over here, and that is our H. But just assume it's there, invisible, but it's our H. We don't put it there because it's blank. All right, but that is our H. All right. And then you leave it blank, but it is H. Now the other bit is opposite 57 degrees. We have 110, put O there, and next to 57 degrees we have our missing, we have this letter here. Alright, so at least there's something there, letter. Alright, so because there's a letter there, it could be a letter or a number already there, that X. Alright, we then have to put a label on there, and that's our adjacent. It's not our longest side, so it's not it's not the hypotenuse, because that longest side is the hypotenuse, but we label it as A because it's adjacent next to the 57. Alright, next step, we've got O and A, and remember the hypotenuse is not labelled, so we just have O and A. And once again going down we have O and A after the T, which stands for tan, so we use tan. Alright, and we've got to decide whether to use divide or not. Well, once again, go back, we can see in TOA if we're trying to find A, we use divide. Are we trying to find A? Well, yes, in this case we are, because this is a letter X. Apart from the A that we put in there, there's another letter, and that's our letter X, meaning we're trying to find what that is. We're trying to find what that X is. Alright, so if we're trying to find that adjacent, we need to use divide. For tan, only for tan, alright? Don't get mixed up, because when you go over here, we've got adjacent over here, and that's got nothing to do with divide for Ka. If we're trying to find the adjacent in TOA, we use divide. Alright, so we're trying to find the adjacent in TOA, we've got divide, we've got 110 divided by tan 57. Alright, so our final video will be in describing the angles, talking about trying to find angles. But at the moment we'll just leave it at that, and just go back so you can see the full view of everything there. So we've done all of these sides over here, described that there, and next video we'll be talking about finding any missing angle when there's an angle in the middle, and you've got to find that out.